Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening at Wimbledon Synagogue's Israel Committee Zoom event. Our guest, as you all know, is Liz Naftali, and she's joining us from the US. The story that she will tell us is about a little girl, Abigail, who got abducted by Hamas on the morning of the 7th of October. Abigail's story, as well as all the other stories that we are carrying in our hearts and minds since the October 7th attack, is in our history already, took its place in the history of Jewish people. And this evening, when we hear the details of her story, it will unite us in grief, and it will perhaps give us some hope that we could get the other hostages who are still held by Hamas safe and alive. Allow me to introduce Liz to you.
So I'll say first, thank you. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Liat. I'm Liz Hirsch Naftali, and I am speaking to you. I am here currently in Maryland in the United States, and I am really here to talk about the truth of what happened on October 7th to our family, to my family. And for me, this is an opportunity to share our story. And then I will be happy to actually answer questions. I'm going to talk about what happened on October 7th, and then what happened with Abigail. And then I will talk about my advocacy. And just before I do that, I can just say that, before October 7th, I lived between Israel and America, married to an Israeli, raised my kids both in Israel and in America. I spent a lot of time along the border of Gaza. Family lived in a kibbutz called Kfar Aza, which is right along the border. And for me, Israel's a second home. And so on October 7th, when everything happened, I was in Israel. But what I'd like to do is just start, and I have some pictures and some things to show you along the way, which I think will also help to illustrate my journey and the journey of what happened on October 7th for our family. So the first is a video that I would love for you to see, which was what life was like on Kibbutz Kfar Aza, this community, this beautiful community for Abigail and our family leading up to October 7th. So if you could play that video, please.
תמסור לצעירים.
ענבר, גם לילדים. ענבר, גם לצעירים, בבקשה.
Abigail.
So basically, that is what it was like on the kibbutz. Beautiful green. I don't know how many of you have been to kibbutzes, but just green. Kids are running around barefoot playing. A yard is a soccer field. And in this picture, in this video, is my niece who was wearing the long black leggings, and her kids and the cousins. So I'm going to go back to October 6th when I arrived in Israel. And I arrived the night of Simchat Torah, and I went to Jerusalem and celebrated the Torah and danced with the Torah. And it was a beautiful evening. It was just this most amazing night of people, Jewish people celebrating Simchat Torah. And I went back the next morning, that evening, and I woke up the next morning in Tel Aviv, where I'd slept, to sirens at 6:30 in the morning. And for many of us, we understand there are sirens that have been blaring through Israel for many years, and people run to their safe room, and then a few minutes later, when they know that there's no more danger, they start their day. But on the 7th of October at 6:30 in the morning, and then subsequently, the bombs kept coming and the sirens kept blaring, and we kept running to the safe room, which at the hotel was the stairwell. About 3 or 4 times after we got back to the stairwell, we learned that something was happening along the border of Gaza. So at that point, I called my sister-in-law Shlomit, my niece Liron, who I know lived there, and asked what was going on, but they didn't answer the phone. I then called my sister-in-law in the middle of the country, and I said to her, "Can you tell me what's going on?" And the first thing she did was tell me that my niece, Smadar, her husband, Roe, and their beautiful little girl, Abigail, had been murdered by Hamas terrorists at first thing at 6:30 that morning. If you could just put the next picture, please. So as you see in this picture, this beautiful family is my niece Smadar and her husband Roe, and on the left is baby Abigail. And I was told at that point in the morning that they had all been murdered. We got our news from this little boy that you see, Michael, who was 9, and a little girl, Amalia, who was 6. They're a little younger in this photo, but they were locked in a cupboard in their home. They had seen their parents be murdered, and they told us that at 6:30 in the morning, the terrorists had come in and murdered Smadar, their mother, in front of them. And then they ran outside, and their father, who was a photojournalist, was coming back. He had realized this wasn't just another missile attack, but it was truly a terrorist attack. And he was running back, and he picked up Abigail in his arms, and they all ran. And then he was gunned down and murdered in cold blood by the terrorists. And he fell onto Abigail. Michael and Amalia, believing that their father and their baby sister had also been murdered, they ran home. They locked themselves in a cupboard, and they were the only people that could tell us what had happened. They stayed in that cupboard for 14 hours until they could be rescued. And what I need to remind everyone on this call is that this kibbutz, this community, had around 650, 700 people that morning. Many of them were children, and almost everyone was locked in their safe room for fear. They weren't going out. The only people that had gone out at all this morning were people who were protecting, who were part of the security for the kibbutz, but everyone else was hiding. And these terrorists, over 300 of them, were going house to house, hunting these innocent people in their homes. So what we learned was from Michael and Amalia. They got rescued after 14 hours. Across the kibbutz, my other niece, Liron, and her husband, Zoli, and their 3 kids, they were locked in a safe room for 30 hours until they could be rescued. Keep in mind, nobody from the IDF came for over 7 or 8 hours. Nobody came to rescue these people. They were all on their own. And what we learned a few days later, when they finally cleared this kibbutz and they could get rid of enough of the terrorists, and many of them were murdered, but a lot of people that were coming down and supporting the families, the reservists were also getting killed. So it took a few days. And what they learned was that Abigail was nowhere to be found. And as you see here, this is this beautiful little girl, Abigail. And what I realized early on was that we needed people to know what Abigail looked like and what Abigail was as a hostage. And in my book, which is called Saving Abigail, which I'll talk about, what we basically realized was that Abigail was nowhere to be found, and that we had learned that she had actually survived. But what we had also learned was she was now a hostage. So I took this photo and I made hundreds of copies of it and hundreds of copies of another photo that had all of the little faces of all the hostages. And I found myself in Washington, D.C., knocking on doors, going into meetings, meeting with Democrats, Republicans, Jewish, not Jewish, and telling these senators and these congressmen and congresspeople exactly what happened to Abigail and to our family, what happened on our kibbutz. So on that morning, keep in mind, there were 12 Americans that were taken along the entire Gaza corridor. 2 of them were from kibbutz Kfar Aza. There's Abigail and another gentleman who just got released named Keith Siegel. And they were neighbors, and they were both taken on October 7th. So I found myself with his family and our family, myself, going and advocating for these hostages release. And this was right away. And this was before many of the families actually showed up, and many came to the US and have been coming consistently to meet with our leaders. And I say this just so that everyone on this phone call understands that it was this mass group of hostage families, survivors from the Nova Music Festival, and people coming to the US government. And they were meeting with Democrats and Republicans. And the American families, myself and others, were meeting with President Biden, Vice President Harris, people like our National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and their team of negotiators. And for the entire Biden administration, until he was no longer the president, the American families were meeting with him and his team at least once a month. And I show you this picture because for me, and I can talk a little bit more in depth, but what I wanted people to know was that this was what a face of a hostage looked like, this 3-year-old, this beautiful little girl. Keep in mind that on October 7th, over 35 children under the age of 18 were stolen, were kidnapped. And we are all very much aware and very sad about the Bibas children that we just learned came back to Israel. We had heard early on that they had probably been murdered, but we all kept hoping that it was just propaganda and that it wasn't true. But what I need people to know is that even on that day of October 7th, tens and tens of babies and little children were murdered by Hamas terrorists. Abigail in our family we called her the lucky one because she was a hostage. But we then figured when she was released after 51 days that she was really, truly, with all these women and children, the fortunate ones, because President Biden and the Qataris were able to get a deal that brought home 105 women and children. Abigail came back after 51 days. But keep in mind, it took another 450 days to start to get this next group out. So as I speak to you, we've seen that over 30 people have been released. We know that some of them have come back and they were killed. But what we've seen is that they are alive and that there are people to save. And so part of why I'm speaking to you and keep speaking is, one, to tell the truth about October 7th, but also to keep in people's minds and to keep people understanding that it's upon all of us, whether in the UK, in America, anywhere in the world, to keep talking about these hostages so that they don't become forgotten. I will back up, and if you could just go to the next photo, please. So Abigail was released after 51 days, and I am very clear that President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and their team, Brett McGurk, who was a special envoy and negotiator, they, with the Qatari government and their negotiating team, got a deal that both Hamas and Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israelis agreed to. So that happened at the end of November. 105 women and children over 6 days were released, and then those negotiations broke down. Abigail was released on the 3rd day, and if you see this picture, she is with my niece, her aunt, and my sister-in-law, her grandmother. And she came back very thin. She had been fed 1 piece of pita bread a day, kept in a very dark room. These children were silenced. She was with another woman and her kids. And this woman, bless her, named Hagar, took beautiful care of Abigail by loving her and hugging her, but she couldn't feed her. She couldn't clean her. All she could do is give her love. And that love is what got Abigail through and got her own children through. And they were released after 51 days. If you go to the next photo, please. So this just gives you an idea of like the advocacy and why. Can you go back, please?
Sorry.
Yeah. So this picture, and the reason I show it is because these were the American families. And until a few days ago, I said that Abigail had been the only one on this photo that was released. But if you look in the middle, you see a gentleman holding a picture of a man named Sagi, and he was released 10 days ago. And Sagi was the father of 3. He was from Nir Oz. His father, Jonathan, traveled the world, spoke everywhere, and his son came home to 3 little girls and a wife just a week and a half ago. His 3rd child was born while he was a hostage. But everyone else in the photo has another child that is still in Gaza. And sadly, in this photo, 2 of the young men were killed on October 7th. One is alive, and he is still a hostage, as are the deceased. And so I show this picture because this was taken in December of 2023, in the middle of the month. And here we are now, and we still have over 60 hostages 16, 15 months later. Next photo. And this was at the invitation of President Biden. He invited Abigail and our family to the White House. And this picture, was just Abigail in his arms and the joy of his child who had been silenced for 51 days after seeing her mom and dad murdered, coming home to no house, no family, that was no parents, but to family, to a beautiful, loving aunt and uncle and sisters and brothers and grandparents, but not her parents. And this is also just a picture of something that people don't understand, was that the efforts from President Biden and his team to bring home these women and children was incredible. Now, we know that he couldn't get the rest of the deal signed by Hamas and by the Israelis, but this picture shows that Abigail and the women and children were saved. Next photo. I like to just show this because this is President Biden. He invited the American families with Prime Minister Netanyahu and their teams. And it was an opportunity for the American families to really speak in front of both and to share their frustrations and to share their families. And what I wanted to show here was this was the American government that was doing this. This was the US president that was bringing the Israeli prime minister to the White House to speak with these families. This was at the end of July, at which time we understood there was a deal and it was close, but there was nothing that was signed until January 20th or January 19th, the day before President Biden was leaving office and President Trump was coming in. But this just goes to show you the efforts that were made, and still no deal was actually signed. And in this time, one of the families, their son was executed, John and Rachel Poland Goldberg's son, Hirsch, a few days, like a month and a half after this picture was taken. Next photo. Photo basically, and we can get to it hopefully, is a picture of President Trump. And what I like to talk about is the transition from Biden to Trump, and that the Biden team worked with the Trump team within the weeks leading up to the transition, so that we had, thank you. So we had National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan from the Biden administration working with incoming National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who would be from the Trump administration. And we had Special Envoy Brett McGurk, who had worked with the Biden administration, working with the new special envoy, who's currently doing most of the negotiating, Mr. Steve Witkoff. And the reason I say it is because while we always see frustration and sides of government that don't work together, on this subject of hostages, they worked together. And I think that is really important. And this picture is the hostage families, both American and international, called up on stage by President Biden and President Trump, and Steve Witkoff. And the reason why I wanted to show this picture is just this continuity of the US government supporting the release of the hostages, and that this isn't a Democrat or Republican, but actually one of the only issues that actually got the majority of Democrats and Republicans aligned, which was the hostages and Israel. And so for me, this is just an important picture. And one of the things that I've heard and we hear is that President Trump talks about these hostages in each public appearance, and he and his team and Mr. Witkoff are in the region and committed to getting the hostages home. Next photo. An opportunity just to see where we are in terms of the government and in terms of people speaking. You can go back to regular. We don't need the sharing anymore.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So really, truly what I wanted to say, and I'd love to open it up for questions, but, was just to kind of give you all an understanding of what happened to Abigail, what her 51 days were like, and then the work that we did in America as hostage families to release these people. And one of the things that I want to say is, like, if you keep in mind, and you may already know this, but the hostage families represented 30 nations. Obviously, one of Abigail's neighbors, Emily, is, a British citizen. And many of these people came from many nations. They represented 5 religions. And what I have talked about, and I keep talking about, is this humanitarian crisis. And that, yes, it did happen in Israel. But what I want the world to know, and we've all seen so many forms of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, but what I really try to do is make sure that people understand that this is a crisis, this is a humanitarian crisis, and whether or not, whatever your opinions are on the Middle East, we all have to denounce terrorism, and we all have to understand that this terrorism, if we do not, could be in your neighborhood or my neighborhood in America. So part of what I try to talk with groups, especially non-Jewish groups, is to really explain this from a humanitarian crisis perspective, and for people to understand what actually happened, and not to follow social media, but to really understand that not only was there the most tragic day for the Jewish people, but this was something that was perpetrated, and that people have still at this point looked at and said, did it really happen? What is the real truth, and did they deserve it? And for me, it's coming and speaking with groups like yourself and traveling the world and really saying, hey, this is a crisis. And I look at this picture and I say, this is the picture I took around. And then I wrote this book. And why I wrote this book, Saving Abigail, was because I wanted for people in this group to be able to understand the true story of what happened to her. But for many people who don't have an opportunity to be on a Zoom or to be in this moment, to kind of understand, whether you're Jewish or not, that this little girl was taken after witnessing the murder of her parents. She was taken for 51 days. This child, full of life, full of energy, was silenced. And as I finished this book in the end of the summer of 2024, we still had hundreds of hostages. Today, as I speak to you, we have 60 hostages. There's a deal that's supposed to end on Thursday. It needs to go into phase 2. And for me, it's also, how do we keep this deal going to bring home not just Abigail, but all of the young men and all the women that are still there who were killed on October 7th. So I'm really trying to appeal to you all to not only hear the story of Abigail, but to understand that we all still have to be advocating and speaking with whoever we can and whomever we can, and really trying to put out there that there are still hostages, and that until these hostages come home, these families and the nation of Israel, and they think all of us, cannot really move forward. So on that, I'd love to open up to questions. If you could put everyone back on, because I just see myself, that would be the best, so that we could have a conversation with everybody together.
Okay, I will do that. And I'll also allow people to unmute. Let me just do that. And then I will take the, sorry.
Oh, that's much better. Great.
Okay. All right. So everybody, you can, could you put your hands up, and if you indicate that you'd like to speak, either by putting a physical hand up or by putting the signal up, that would be great. It's nice to see everybody's pictures. Thank you for putting your, Ella, would you like to start?
Do you know if Abigail was kept with people she knew?
Yes, so Abigail was kept with this woman, Hagar, and her 3 children. They were taken off the kibbutz together. But we did not learn that for a few days. And during the whole time when Abigail was a hostage, all I kept saying was, I prayed that she was with Hagar. Because what we learned at the end was that Ella, yes, she was with Hagar, and this woman took care of her in terms of hugging her and loving her. But for the most time, it was Hagar and her 3 children, who are 8, 10, and 4, and Abigail. And they were alone. In the beginning, there were some other hostages that were being kept with them. They were never down in a tunnel, but they were up in an apartment. But even though they were up in a building, the rooms, it was a very small room. It was very dirty and very dark, and it was insect infested. It was disgusting. But she was with this woman and her 3 kids for the entire time.
Does she talk about what happened to her parents?
She doesn't talk about the physical mourning, but she talks about her parents. And one of the things that we've done and we've allowed and we understand is that she needs to speak when it's appropriate. And I'll share this, which is that every child who's been part of this, who has suffered and is a victim on October 7th, whether they personally were victims, where they were kidnapped and then released, or their parents were killed, or there's still kids whose parents are there. Everybody has a therapist, and there is a lot of therapy, and that's the places that it comes out in. It's not like you're sitting there and you speak about it as much as when she has something to say, then you can listen and you can hear it. But she knows very well that she was in Gaza. She knows where she was. She knows who she was with. But, at the same time, we also are moving forward and trying to have conversations that are about her school that she goes to, the kids she gets to play with now, and making her life what it should be, which is a life that is just beautiful for a 5-year-old. She just turned 5.
Did she go to their home?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Did she go to their home in Kfar Aza?
No, the home is destroyed. No, they have not gone back. And their home was not only obviously where her mother was murdered, but the furniture was overturned and it was destroyed in the sense of like it's not a place that you would walk back into.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shama.
How is, you've actually kind of answered the question. How's she doing now? And the other question is, do you feel that Israel did as much as they could have done?
So I'll go to the second question, which is Israel. I'm going to say this, which I feel like the Israeli people took care of the Israeli people. And I think you all know this. Like you could see that Israeli people were bringing food to the soldiers. The Israeli people were the ones that put on their reserve uniforms, and they came down before the army could get there, and they came to fight to help these people. I mean, we hear incredibly beautiful stories of people that picked up people at the Nova Music Festival and brought them to safety and put their life on the line. And to this day, I will tell you that the warmth and the support for the hostage families from the other Israeli families has been incredible. Look, the Israeli government, it was a failure. And I say this because my niece was murdered, her husband was murdered, many of their neighbors were murdered. Over 1,200 people were killed and murdered on October 7th. No one was there. 250 people were taken hostage. And the numbers have increased, but we start with those numbers that we had on around that time. And, the security and the intelligence chiefs have all admitted failure. The prime minister has not. But what I like to talk about is that right now, we can go back to October 7th as humans and as Jews and as people that care, and we need to. But from my focus and what I try to talk about is where we are right now, because we still have over 60 people, 61, I believe, who need to be released. And I believe that over 30 of those are young men and men that are alive. And so while I want to talk about October 7th at some point, and I think it's really important for people to know what happened on October 7th, the focus needs to be on pressuring, praying, doing everything we can to ensure that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cabinet could keep this deal going, that as of Thursday, whether it's phase 1 or phase 2, that we don't stop, because the last time we stopped a deal was in December of 2023. It took 450 days to get another deal. These people can't wait. And so for me, that's an important conversation. And the other important conversation is how can Gulf nations and the Qataris and the Egyptians continue to put pressure on Hamas? And then get these people home. And then we can go back to the failures. And then we can also discuss all the other things that haven't gone correctly. But if we go to those sides right now and we don't focus on these last hostages whose lives are needing to be saved, I personally feel like we will have failed them.
Thank you. Nikki?
Much. Thank you.
Hi
Thank
there.
you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, is that Nikki Levy?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. First of all, thank you very much for your incredible, all the information that you've just given us and your account of what's gone on with Abigail. I'm interested to hear, but maybe you have partially already answered this question, about the rehabilitation and the long-term effects of being a hostage on a child. What's involved in rehabilitating a child? And are there any studies done on the long-term effects of it?
I'm almost like, I wish I could say more, but like this is something that we don't have an example of. I mean, there's been children in war and children in all sorts of situations, but this situation, other than if you go back to the Holocaust for the Jewish people, we have nothing that we can go to and look at it. And this is a modern story. But what I will say is that the costs are that a child like Abigail, when an airplane flies over and makes a large booming sound, she could go like this and be in terror because of being under 51 days of bombs from the IDF. And the building they were in, and I write about it in the book, Saving Abigail, the building they were in was destroyed by IDF bombs. The little girl that she was with was injured. Another person was injured. They were then moved to another location. But Nikki, what I will say is that they all have a therapist. They go to like dog therapy and horse therapy. There's so many people that have reached out to them from across the world, taken them on trips, given them extra opportunities so that they could have the Disneyland experience, but they could have the social experience. And they've done this with a lot of the families. It's not just ours, but many of the hostage families. Some are Jewish groups, some are Christian groups, but the amount of love and outpouring of support, and that's what I always go to help these kids, to help these families, is outstanding. And, you know, people talk about Abigail. I look at like Michael and Amalia, who are now 7 and 10. They spent 14 hours alone with their mother's body next to them, dead. Like, I don't know what that means for a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old at the time and how they carry that with them. But what I can say, Nikki, is they live in a new community where they are loved. They have friends. Michael plays soccer. You say football. Like they're been given another life. And they've had these, 16, 17 months since October 7th to make new memories and to have these trips and to be loved. And I go back again to the hostages that have been there for these last months that Abigail was released, since October 7th, since November 26th, when she was released. These families haven't been able to move forward. These families have their loved ones there. So while what you're describing is I will also say, like for the Nova Music Festival, people put in these places for these young people to go and get help and to go and get therapy. And there is a lot of it. But I'm going to share with this group, there's been many, many people who have taken their lives since the Nova Music Festival that are related to that Nova Music Festival. What happened there was atrocious. And while 367 people were killed, there were still over 2,000 others that were victims, survived, and the numbers are huge. And so your question is a really good one, and it's just going to be one that I believe. First, you have to bring home the rest of these hostages who are from the Nova Festival and from these kibbutzes and from these communities. But it is going to be a trauma for Israel for generations to come. What happened on October 7th? I'm sorry to say it, but it will be.
I actually feel like it's in our DNA now. I feel it's for me personally, it's in my psyche. Every moment, every news flash, everything that comes up, it raises my it raises my tension level. What's going to happen now? And I feel like we're all, I feel like I'm living on the edge quite a lot of the time because of everything that's going on there.
Yeah, I think we all are. But I say this, Nikki, which is, for me, it goes back to the only way you can move forward and I can move forward doesn't mean we forget by any means. This is something that is like very much I wake up in the morning and I go to bed at night saying, what more can I do? How more can I help? And I've been doing this for a long time. But I know that we all have to, no matter how bad it is and no matter what our political opinions are, if we do not focus on getting these hostages back, we will not be able to move forward in our hearts and our souls. So I'm with you. And I wish I could give you a hug and tell you, I know how you're feeling, because I feel it. And I think so many of us feel it. But I also say we have to fight so that Abigail and these kids and all these people have an opportunity to move forward. And the first thing that we can do is make sure that we do everything we can to tell the stories, keep the truth out there, but to push to make sure that this deal continues. They got to get these people home. And I know people are like going, wait a minute, we're sitting here in London, we're here in this, like, what can we do? Well, everyone here has social media, everyone here has a way to speak up. And part of it is making sure that the Jewish story, the Israel story, is the narrative. It does not become a narrative of others that are taking to the streets with hate in their heart, but that we stay strong and we stay there and support. And I go back to that this child, and all these other children are going to have the strength of all of us. And I go back to Nikki, one last piece, like this book was a quick piece of me saying, we have to get a year's history. We need people to know. There'll be many more books. There'll be many more people that are going to come with horrific stories. But what we also need to do is make sure that we stand strong and that this is a story told about what happened in Israel on October 7th. And so you have an ability to leave this call and to feel bad, or you have an ability to leave this call and feel bad and then go and do and speak and put on social media, whether it's me or other hostages that are still out there, share their stories. Share your support for the release of all these hostages. That to me is really what we can individually do at this moment and be in community.
Thank you. Arnold, you had your hand up, but I think you've put it down. Is that right?
Yes, I didn't want to repeat all the questions that have gone before, and I also want to thank Liz for for bringing her story to us. So it's only I don't want to repeat everything that's gone before.
Okay.
I would say this though, that I go every week to a vigil that we hold outside either Parliament or the Prime Minister's house, which is very near Parliament, for the hostages. We're still doing it. Unfortunately, until this is solved, we will be doing it, I'm sure. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's so important. Can I tell you, that is so important. And I overlooked saying the amount of, like I was yesterday in Central Park for a 500-day rally with the Jewish community and others I saw that weren't from the Jewish community, but we have to keep doing that, because I will tell you that people on the Hamas side and people on the Israeli side that are the ones who can keep the deals going and keep working to get these hostages, they're watching. So what you're doing there is very, very important.
And many of the people who come are not Jewish.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of support, much more support than you think.
Yes, we need to know that and talk about it.
Thank you. Nicola.
Liz, first of all, thank you so much for your time tonight. And actually, Arnold, I've been with you at Parliament, but what I was told is that we're actually standing in the wrong place and we should be outside the Qatar, we should be giving them more of the pressure and not the UK Parliament. So we might need to think about changing the location. But I also wanted to say...
that one. We were there.
Yeah. Qatar, we've got to pressurize Qatar. They're saying it's Qatar that need our voices. The other thing that I've been doing since the beginning is actually, no matter how much hate we see, we just throw the love back in there, and we just throw back the love into wherever we can. We've been writing to every single released hostage family, every single hostage family, and it's just growing and growing, the connections, and it helps to keep them walking. I know that Matana Angres' mother said to me, it just keeps them going on these long, hard... We will not stop. We will not stop saying their names. We will not stop writing their names in love, because it is another force out there that counteracts the evil. I really do believe that. But thank you.
Yeah, and I will say one thing. First, I think that one of the places for me is this place of love. I could be sitting here with lots of hate in my heart right now. My family, looking at these 3 children, knowing that my niece and her husband aren't at a birthday, they aren't at a Hanukkah, they aren't at a Shabbat. But I also say, and I think we all agree, no matter how much we are so sad, if we go with hate, then we're not making the world safer for our kids, but we're also perpetuating the hate that got us to this moment. And I don't say that like in a philosophical, we have to win and we have to make sure Israel is safe and secure, but we also as individuals have to carry love, because if not, then there's no good, I believe there's nowhere good we're going. But I want to say something about the Qataris, and I'm going to say this to you all in this group as my friends in the UK. If it were not for the Prime Minister, His Excellency Al Thani of Qatar, and his negotiating teams, and President Biden, these hostages, these women and children, 105 at the end of November, early December 2023, would never have been released. They didn't get released because Hamas woke up one day and heard us saying, release the hostages, stop the fighting, and everything will be, which we've been saying, and then the people of Gaza will be taken care of. That never happened. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has had a conflict, and I get it. You must protect Israel and keep Israel safe and get rid of Hamas. But we've also had the hostages. And he has said, we need to get these hostages. But if it were not for the pressure of President Biden and team and the Qataris, I'm not sure Abigail and her women and children would have been released. But what I will tell you is that the Qataris are on this job, and we can talk about everything before October 7th, and there's a lot of people who were involved in the Israeli side and on the Arab side. But what I want to talk about is how we move forward right now. And yes, I believe you should keep putting pressure on the Qataris because they can do more, and they need to know we want them to. But listen, guys, the Egyptians need to be doing more. The Saudis need to be doing more. The Turks need to be doing more. The Emirates need to be doing more. The Bahrainis, the Moroccans, anybody from the Sunni nations, they have relationships with the Qataris, with the Hamas leaders, and they have relationships with the Israelis. If you hear from these Sunni nations that they put pressure and they say, we want a deal, we want to bring home the hostages, want to take care, that's the silence. I haven't heard any of that. So you can go stand in front of the Qataris, but I just want you all to know that if you had the ability to stand in front of a few other embassies and get some press and say, hey, how come you're not speaking up? How come you're not putting pressure on Hamas? I think you actually could also make some really good impact.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Hello, Liz.
Hi.
I'm a Gentile, and I just want to say to you that I pray every day, every morning and every evening for the hostages, and I have been doing since October. And it's on my heart. It breaks my heart to even, and all my friends, we pray for the Jews. We pray to Hashem that he will help us to be released. It's our heartfelt, I don't know how to say, it's so, when we see all the release of these young men and the way they've been treated and the publicity by Hamas, it's degrading, it's horrendous. And we just say, dear Lord God, bring out the hostages. We pray that morning and evening. I just want to tell you, I go to a church in North London, and we as a church pray all the time for Israel, for the Jews, for the release of the hostages. Just to let you know, shalom, shalom, and thank you.
Well, that gives a lot of strength. And I think it shows, by the way, Elizabeth, that we hear the loud voices of those people with hate, but what we need to do is celebrate and lift up the voices of love.
Amen.
Thank you. A question from me. You mentioned the other Sunni nations, and that sounds right. Do you think we should also be doing more to pressure the Red Cross?
I'm going to be honest with you. The Red Cross at this point
are useless.
Don't use your energy there. They aren't going to put any pressure on anyone. That's a conversation for after. Right now, in order to save lives and who has pressure on Hamas, the Red Cross is last on that list. They've put no efforts to be pressuring them. And I mean, with other families, and I don't even bother. I've met with them, and they have just failed in terms of, I believe, what their mission is. But now they just drive people in and out. Okay, so that's great. Put that aside, go back to who has pressure on Hamas. And that is also the Iranians. Okay. And who has pressure on the Iranians? And I believe it's the nations, and I believe it's the people that we could be standing in front of their embassies. And sometimes it's just putting it out there. And, Hamas is watching. If Hamas sees you putting pressure on these Arab nations see you put pressure on them. I have to tell you, it gives a different influence than if you just stand in front of a square or you stand in front of the Qataris. And of all those nations, the one nation that has met with the American families and Israeli families is Qatar, the Qataris, the prime minister and his team, the ambassador in DC, ambassadors across the country, across the world. The Egyptians haven't met with us. The Saudis haven't met with us. None of the other nations, the Turks, and we've tried. The Jordanians, they have not accepted any opportunities to meet with the hostage families. just the Qataris. So keep putting pressure on them. I'm just trying to remind us all that there's a bigger world than the Qataris. And they're the only ones I know who are 24/7 working to release these hostages.
That's an interesting perspective. The information we are given here is that the Qataris are big funders of Hamas, and therefore, given that they seem to want to face in all directions, perhaps this is in their interest. Or do you think that's too cynical of you?
I think that I'm going to go to how do we get these hostages back? Because if you want me to go to Hamas and the funding that Qataris gave, we could talk a lot about Israel and the part they played, and that doesn't help me bring home. It doesn't help us bring home the hostages. There's a lot of, I say, on October 7th, we woke up in a geopolitical nightmare. This is 75 years plus of people together doing incredibly horrible deals that everybody sort of had a piece in. So are the Qataris innocent of what happened before October 7th? Again, I think there's a lot for us to discuss. But right now, if I want to fight to get hostages back, which is all I'm really trying to talk to you all about, I'm not naive, but if this is our goal, the Qataris are the ones that are sitting there every day pushing and mediating. So yeah, that said the first thing, keep putting pressure on them, put more. But they're not alone in terms of who can put pressure on Hamas to make a deal.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay, Nikki, you want to come back? Go on.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out we have a demonstration every single week in Elstree and Boreham Wood. It's at 9:30 on the dot, and it's for half an hour. We probably have at least 100 people there. We have non-Jewish people attending. We sometimes have a local rabbi. We always have a speaker, either somebody from a hostage family or someone from an advocacy group or somebody from a charity group. It's always absolutely amazing. We sing, we have flags. It's always very positive, and it's filmed as well. So that's every single week. Also, I have been to the Qatari embassy on multiple occasions, just so you know. Also, we know there's demonstrations in London. There's a demonstration outside the BBC tomorrow evening about their coverage of what's been going on with Gaza and how biased and all the misinformation and their irresponsible reporting and their propaganda, etc. But I also wanted to just show you my wall. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see my wall?
Yes.
Yes. Wow.
So that has been on my wall for the last year.
Cool.
And he's asked about Qatar, and there you go. And this is my front door, which is really very sad indeed.
Yeah.
But we are, and also Elstree and Boreham Wood is probably one of the biggest Jewish communities in the whole of the UK now, very fast growing. And so there are a lot of people coming to this demonstration, and we are very much united in solidarity.
Thank you for doing that. And this is the moment. This is a moment where if we do not keep this deal going and we do not bring them home, I would hate for us to lose this momentum. So keep going and being brave and bold. Thank you.
And Wednesdays outside Kinloss as well, for those that are, that happens every single Wednesday, 9:30 as well.
That's exactly what I put my hand up to say. And yeah, we do both the Kinloss one and the Boreham Wood one. So the more you can go to, the better, if you're possible.
Fantastic to know that there's so many people putting so much in on this call. Thank you. Thank you, everybody who's going to all the demonstrations and so on. Is there anybody else who wanted to make a comment or ask a question?
Actually, could I?
Go for it, Shana.
Sorry, so I'm in many of the activist groups, so obviously we're doing all the vigils as well. And we're doing a lot of countering and the hostages. We're doing for Emily outside the football grounds and things. Do you think anybody in this group would like to join the WhatsApp group so we can all stay informed of anything for the hostages together? I know there are a lot of different mediums where we can be seeing it on Facebook and things, but just to make sure everyone knows what's going on, because there's quite a few we found South London people joining in as well, which we didn't realise such a community in South London.
If you'd like to send me the information, then anybody who wants it, I'd be happy to share it with. Send me whatever.
Thank you. And really thank you to the speaker as well, and Elizabeth, you're both a really.
Well,
I
I just
do-
want to say thank you because look, being here with you all, yes, I get to share, but I also seeing your faces, hearing your stories, but hearing your advocacy, it gives myself strength and then it gives my family the strength. And I just say thank you because, you know, I could have stopped when Abigail was released and said, okay, Abigail's safe. You all could have stopped any time, and I don't say it lightly, but you are there and you are fighting and you will fight till each person is home. And that is who we are as Jewish people. We don't leave people behind. And we have a moral prerogative, which is how do we make sure that we bring everybody home? We keep Israel safe. But I think we all know that right now for us to be able to move forward is the release of these hostages. So if there's ways, you know, through your groups or things that I can help you with or connect you with others, or I can speak to others. I don't need a large group. You know, people say, oh, you did CNN, you did Fox, you did this. And like sometimes I have to be reminding people, and I'll remind you, an hour with you, I believe is more beneficial than 3 minutes on BBC, although BBC, I'm with you all on that, how horrible they've been. But if we all go and do what we need to go and do and keep putting that pressure, I believe that we are going to help make the difference. So again, I still think we should try to get BBC to understand what they've done wrong, but I also believe in the voice of all the people on this call and all the people in our communities. You have here 30 people. If everybody here goes and reaches out to 10 people and 10 people and 10 people and says the story of Abigail, or says the story of that there's 60 hostages, or says the story that there are that there is a deal that's supposed to move into phase 2 on Thursday, and we needed to keep going. We have a lot of power in this group. So thank you. And when you go to your groups and you go and speak on the streets, tell everybody these things.
Judy?
Thank you. Leah, I see you've got some questions.
Yes, I do. I don't think I'm trying to put my hand up visually, but I couldn't manage that. I have few things. One question is actually from a friend who is with us, but I don't think he can type or he can ask. So he sent me the question. The question is, Qatar and Turkey didn't even hesitate to hide their support for Hamas, which is true. And now we are thanking them because of their efforts to release hostages from Hamas. Does it make sense? He says. I think, I will obviously listen to your answer, but I think you covered that saying every single effort that we need to put on the table has to be about bringing the hostages back. There are so many other fronts that we have to question, but if there is one war that we can choose, is the life of people who are out there. So what would you say?
I'd say exactly that. And that's what I've said, which is there's going to have to be a lot of conversation. And we could sit here for the next few hours talking about everybody that played a part in that, what got us to October 7th. But right now, this is the only conversation I can have, and it's not in naivete. It's not because I'm naive, but it's because if we don't focus on the hostages and we go to all these other players and we don't focus on what it is we need to accomplish, I fear that these 30 plus people who are alive and those who were killed on October 7th or since, that neither the live nor the bodies will return to Israel. So I don't go into that direction because I feel like it's counterproductive for what I believe is the most important thing right now, which is to getting people home.
Yeah.
The other question that I will have for you, Trump's plans to turn Gaza into something different. How do you think this is going to affect the efforts that we are making and the negotiations that are going on with Hamas?
So I don't know the answer because I don't know. It's so hard to know, but what I go to is that President Trump is President Trump. We've seen him, we know how he operates, and he throws out a lot of ideas. And whether you like them or don't like them, again, if we go into that conversation and we don't focus on the life saving, we can also be planning what should or shouldn't happen in Gaza, but we have to make our focus of the hostages. And one thing I'll say, Liat, is that And I said this earlier, and I'll say it again. President Trump, every speech I've heard him make, and being on that stage at the inaugural and prayer breakfasts and press conferences since, he has talked about the hostages. He tweets about the hostages. He puts on his social media about bringing home the hostages. And he goes back to your first question about the Qataris, who's on our side. Anybody on this call who is on my team, and Elizabeth, you talked about your praying with your church. We just need everyone on our team to bring home these hostages. Then we can do the day after and we can talk about those things. But none of those things are going to happen if we don't stay together on getting back the hostages. So we have a lot to talk about. And by the way, as Jewish people, we know how important a lot of these conversations are going to be. But I think the most important conversation everyone here should be thinking about is how to save lives. Innocent people who were stolen on October 7th. Many of them who we see are coming back, they're abused. They were injured on October 7th. They're coming back still with their wounds, still with bullets in their bodies, young girls who were raped and tortured. And I look at it and I say, let's get the rest of these people home and then let's have these conversations.
Agreed.
I think that might be a great place for us to pull this to a close. It's just been such a moving and powerful
final thing, Judy.
testimony. Sorry, do you have one more thing you want to ask?
Don't mind.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
It's me, Liat.
Leah, was there something you wanted to say?
Yes. Just one thing. I managed to find the biography that I couldn't find at the beginning of your talk. Now I know that you have a platform. You are the creator of the Capital Coffee Connection podcast. How do you use that platform, and how often do you use it, and how do you facilitate?
That's a good, it's a good way to end, okay? Because before October 7th, I was American Democrat. And on October 7th, when I woke up to this tragedy, to Israel, to my family, I thought, you know what? I'm just an American. And I don't say that I say that in a proud way. I'm very proud to be an American, but I'm a Jew. I'm a Zionist. I'm an American. And I have to have conversations, Liat, with people who are different than me. What we saw for years, and I know that it's harder to do, but we talk about, we get entrenched on, we're on one side and everyone is on the other side and we don't like them or we don't talk to them. And I had done democratic politics for many years, supporting leaders, people that I believe should be leaders. But May of 2023, I started this podcast. It's called the Capital Coffee Connection Podcast. And my goal was to meet with Democrats and Republicans, but not to talk about politics and policy, but to talk about their heart and their humanity and who they are. Because what I saw was we weren't talking. This was before October 7th. And it started out as oh, is it going to work? And then what I was realizing is that if you talked with Republicans and Democrats, and I'm using my American formula, and you didn't know what party they were from or what they voted on, you would just hear about these amazing people. They were no longer just a politician, but they were real humans. And then October 7th happened, and I was in this position where I needed to speak with everyone. And I found Republicans and Democrats, again, if you didn't know if they had an R or D next to their name, they were there listening to myself and hundreds of hostage families, and they were giving them heart and love and support, and they were getting on the floor of the House and the Senate in our Capitol and saying there's hostages. And so that project, which I had to stop doing because I was working full-time as an advocate, I did start to pick it up towards a year ago once Abigail was released. But what I will say to everyone on this call is that the one thing that I have found is that with all the world and all the craziness and these hostages, that this concept of speaking across lines, speaking in your parliament across lines, speaking in the US, and really looking for who we can talk to and have relationships with is why I started this podcast. I just had the angle of the politicians, but I will end on this, that one of the people that has helped me the most is a woman named Penny Nance. She comes from an organization that is called, it's an evangelical organization called Concerned Women for America. And we don't agree on many things, but I really like this woman and we've become good friends. And she has helped me through this process, meet so many incredible leaders. But what we agree on is Israel. We agree on the hostages must be released, and we agree on how you treat people. And that goes to, she supports her students and her young people go on campuses in America to help students who are victims of anti-Semitism. And the reason I bring this up is because it brings it back to, I would have never met her, I would have never had a conversation with her if it hadn't been for October 7th. But what I have learned, and I want to end on this, is like, we need to have that common humanity, which is terrorism has to be eradicated. Israel must stay strong, but we have to have difficult and interesting conversations, and they have to be ones that are personal and have to be about how do we get people to be supporting Israel, supporting the Jews, and immediately supporting the release of these hostages. So I can end on that and just say thank you very much. And I look forward to continuing conversations. And if I can be any help, even from America and talking about this work, please let me know. And I hope that the next time that you're on a Zoom, that more hostages are home.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Amen.
Thank you. It's
Thank
been
you all.
powerful,
Before we say
moving.
goodbye, I would like to urge everyone to buy the book that Liz wrote, Saving Abigail. We know what happens when we don't own our own history, just like how Holocaust is being denied.
Mm.
This testimony, this written evidence is so important to be on our shelves, to be
Thank
part
you.
of our memory, our long.
Thank you for saying that.
So Saving Abigail, I ordered my book from
Thank
Amazon, and I will get it signed with by Liz, hopefully when I see her face to face.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the UK. I really felt so warmly embraced and met with amazing people. And I will share with you all, I did a Christian broadcast channel podcast on the Middle East. So I'll send that if you want to share that also with your communities, which also it talks about what we've talked about. And I know you've taped this, but it's like a one-on-one hour of also really interesting conversation. But we do need to keep, like you said, we need to own our history and we need to be able to have it documented. And that's what I try to do. So thank you, Leah. And thank you, Judy.
We couldn't host you in our shul last time when you were in the UK. It was a very short notice. But please do let us know.
I will.
Before your arrival, and we
will.
would love to have you meet you in person.
Thank you. And thank you all for taking the time, and thank you for your heart and your love. I appreciate it.